We'll start solution for SBR English Prep. So I hope you can hear me. Is there everything clear? Can you just reply in the chat? Okay, fine. Okay, so it's day one. So we'll be having a 5-day section. Okay, so here we'll be having a 5-day section for SBR revision. Yeah, it's recording. It will be available later on. Yeah. Hey guys, so start the revision part. Okay. Almost few participants have joined. Okay, perfect. So on day one, I will be just discussing about the introduction of. So our plan strategy will be on day one. We'll be discussing about the introduction, SPR, how to deal with this paper and what are the tricks and concepts that you have to follow. And apart from that, I will be discussing about accounting standards. So our agenda is we will try to cover almost every accounting standards, every important accounting standards in the first 3 days. Then day 1 to day 4 will be focusing on. Day 3 will be focusing on the accounting standards. Okay, and on day 4, we'll focus on the current issues. Sorry, the consolidation, the group accounts part, and finally on day 5, we'll focus on the final day. We'll focus on current issues. And issues and latest developments in. Okay. So this is the overall plan for the section. Okay. So being in the introduction, so we'll just discuss about the overall marking scheme of this paper. We know that we have got 3 questions here. So literally 4 questions here in SBR. Question number 1. So we have section A. In section A, we have 2 questions. One question which is worth 30 marks. It's a question from group. 2 groups. And we'll get the second question will be from ethics. It is related to ethics. Okay. It's related to ethical issues. And section B, we have got 2 compulsory questions. Question number 3 and 4. Each worth 25 marks. Okay, this is your overall marking scheme. And if you're looking at the weightage, unlike other P-level papers, here almost 85% of this paper is about discussion. 85% is to discuss, or simply you have to explain the answers. That's the first important factor you have to accept. I hope that all of you have attended any of the classes. Okay, so your faculty may have told you this. 85% of this paper is about discussion, and 15% is what will be. So even as an accounting paper, literally you don't have anything to calculate. You don't need to prepare any cash flow. You are not required to prepare any consolidated statement. It's all about the discussion. This whole paper is about discussion. So what does it discuss about? Different aspects. So first of all, it discusses about the conceptual framework. The conceptual framework can get tested almost for 8 to 10 marks. So almost 10 marks, 8 to 10 marks weightage can get from conceptual framework. But unlike your papers which you have learned in FR, I know that in FR, normally we have an assumption that conceptual framework is some talking about to discuss something, literally you have to discuss that in relation to conceptual framework. Okay, so we'll be starting our with conceptual framework itself. Then, apart from the conceptual framework, the current issues can get tested for 5 to 8 marks. They can ask conceptual framework. Then the group related adjustments. So I will say that group related adjustments. I won't say that preparation of, I can't say it as a whole preparation of consultative statement. You will have to do some adjustments with relates to group scenarios. So it will be worth 13 to 15 marks. So 13 to 15 marks will be from that area. And there will be interpretation. So interpretation in the sense you don't need to calculate any ratios. For example, you will get a question that I hope that all of you know the change which has been happened in IFRS 16, right? There was a change from IFRS 17 to IFRS 16. So because of that change, how it would have impacted the treatment, how that particular treatment would impact the different ratios of a company, such as the profitability ratios and the debt equity ratios. That's how you have to interpret it. It's not like something you have get in F7. You won't be getting any two statements to compare and give the analysis. It's about how you interpret the situation. Like let's say there is a different accounting policies we have. We used to use different accounting choices we have in grant, the standard grant, or even investment property, or even in IA 16. We used to have different accounting policy choices. That is, we can either follow cost model or revaluation model. So what will be the impact? So if a company is following revaluation model, how it's going to affect their financial statements. If a company is following cost model, what are the advantages and disadvantages? So this is how you have to interpret about the accounting treatments. You have to simply discuss about the accounting treatment. So you can just expect questions for 10 marks from that area. Is it clear, everyone? So you can expect the consistent questions from consistent framework. Okay. And even we can expect the questions from current issues. Then group related adjustments will be there. Then interpretations can come. Then ethics. You may be asked to write 7 to 8 marks for ethics. So the accountant may make some mistake. So you have to find it out whether it is a threat to objectivity, whether it is a self-interest threat, whether it's a confidentiality issue, whether it's a confidentiality threat, or is it like an intimidation threat? So we have to discuss about the ethical part. So there can be a question with regards to that. And whatever which is remaining, it will be for accounting standards. So that's the other interpretation. That's another assumption we have to learn. So almost 80%, almost 80 or almost 50 to 60% of your question will be testing on accounting standards. So that's the reason in the first 3 initial days, we'll be focusing on the accounting standards. We have to focus in depth about each and every accounting standards, and we'll practice questions from that areas. Is it clear, everyone? So have you noted down this one? Can you reply in the chat? So first of all, we'll start off with conceptual framework. So we'll start off our revision with conceptual framework. So what does it cover in conceptual framework? So literally in conceptual framework, they mainly focus on So it's almost like a reference guide. It's almost like a reference guide, or we can say that it's like a Bible for our accounting standards. So we will refer these particular books. It's like a reference book, and with the help of that reference book, we will be able to make up new changes in the accounting standard. If there is any change or evaluation in any accounting standard, that is basically with respect to consensus framework. The consensus framework literally have actually consists of 8 chapters. Since it's a revision, I'm not going to discuss everything in detail, but we can just go through the important aspects. So the conceptual framework discuss about the definitions. What all includes in the conceptual framework? It includes definitions of asset, liability, equity, income, as well as expenses. Okay. So especially with respect to this definition, I hope that all of you are aware about the new reverse conceptual framework. So earlier we used to follow the conceptual framework of 2010. Now the conceptual framework has been reversed in 2018. So as a result, they have changed. What the main change have came in the conceptual framework is with respect to the definitions. So literally there is no, we are not at all following the earlier definitions of asset. Earlier, the asset is something which is controlled by an entity as a result of past event, and probable that it is expected to bring future economic inflow. So that probability has been removed. So now the probability, that definition says that there is no more probability. So what do you mean by asset? Asset is an economic resource. So as a result, the new definition says that asset is an economic resource. It is an economic resource controlled by an entity as a result of past. So now the definition does not say that it is not anymore saying that the future expected cash flows are expected to come. So that expected cash flows, that portion has been removed. So because there is no proper definition for probability criteria, or we can say that there is no proper way in which we can calculate or interpret what's the definition of probability. Okay, the probability is interpreted in different manner, different accounting standards. So literally it gave to a disruption in your accounting treatments. So that's the reason now they have removed this probability criteria. And what is an asset? Asset is something which is as a resource controlled by an entity as a result of past. Is it clear? So whenever there is a changes coming in the conceptual framework, we know that it may take some time to get adapted to this accounting standards, individual accounting standards. So whenever there is a situation arises where the conceptual framework is getting collide, or there is a conflict between the conceptual framework and what it is written in the accounting standards. So which one should prevail? Will follow which one? Will you follow what is written in the conceptual framework, or will you follow what is written in the accounting standard? So whenever there is a clash, or there is a clash of interest between what is written in the conceptual framework and in the individual accounting standards, which one should prevail, or which one we should follow? Can you reply in the chat? Yeah, we have to follow the standard. So just note that point. Conceptual framework never overrides individual standards. It never overrides the individual standards. Is it clear? So for example, we know that IAS 37 is having a provision, definition for provision, right? So what is this written in provision standard? Can you just rewind or just recap what it is written in provision? It should be probable that future economic outflow will result. It will result in future economic outflow to settle the obligation. That's the definition for provision. So that's the definition that even now they follow the same definition, but that probability criteria has been removed from your liability definition. So nowadays, as per constitutional framework, liability is a obligation. It's a present obligation. Yeah, it's a present obligation as a result of past event. You have a present obligation as a result of past event. Apart from that, we are not quoting that sentence that it is expected to, it is, to settle that liability, it will expected to result in some outflows. So that expected portion has been removed. So nowadays, the asset as well as in the liability, we are not anymore following that probability criteria. We are not anymore following that probability criteria. So that's an important part. Sometimes they can get tested. It can get tested in your conceptual framework scenario. So liability means it's a present obligation. So it's a present obligation as a result of and what about equity? What's the definition of equity? It's a residual interest. It's a residual interest in the net assets of the residual interest in the net assets of an entity that is known as equity. And what is income? Income means anything that increases assets, decreases liability. So income is something that increases your equity. So you can say that it is any inflow that can increase your assets but decrease your liability, then it's an income. And with respect to expense, it will result in decrease in asset and increase in. So these are the definitions of asset, equity, liability, and income according to constitution. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, so if you are acquiring 30% of shares in a company, what's your residual interest? You have shares of that company, and literally you have acquired 30% of shares of the company. So that's your residual interest in the net assets of a company. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? So I hope you understood how it can get tested. So literally we know that, and apart from that, now earlier the recognition criteria of constitutional framework says that it should meet the definition, and if it is an asset, then it is probable that that probability criteria was there. Then the cost should be reliably measured. So these were the previous recognition criteria. But now the recognition criteria says that it should meet the definition. Let's say if you have to account for intangible asset as an intangible asset, first of all, it should meet the definition. And next one, they says that the information should be relevant. Information should be relevant and faithfully. Information should be relevant and faithfully represented. Is it clear, everyone? So if the information is relevant means something which is material, we can say it as relevant. Okay. And faithfully represented means should not have any errors, should be neutral, and the information should be complete. So if the information is relevant and faithfully represented, then it can be that particular line item can be recognized in your financial statements. Is it clear, everyone? But again, we know that these accounting standards or these definitions are not as per, it's not as per our individual accounting standard. When it's still in the individual accounting standards, we used to follow the same recognition criteria. So that's a current issue. Is it clear? Another type of question you can expect from consensus framework. Let's say, have you heard about the standard IAS 19? Have you heard about the standard IAS 19? Can you reply in the chat? Have you heard about the standard IAS 19? Yeah, IAS 19 for employment benefits. There, we need to account for the defined liability. We used to account for the liability. That is, if you are promising a certain percentage of the final salary as provision, then we have to create a liability, the pension liability. But according to the definition of the consensus framework, it's a present obligation as a result of past event. But paying that pension after the age of 60 is not an obligation. As of now, it's not an obligation for the company. The employee can either work for 60 years, the employee can even leave the company earlier. Okay, so there is no assurance that, or there is a probability that this obligation can be avoided. This obligation can be avoided in future. So if it's an obligation that can be avoided in future, it should not be recognized as liability anymore. But still, we used to account it as a liability in your accounting standard. So that's what there might be a question arising on that point that, okay, the recognition of liability as per IAS 19, is it in accordance with consensus framework? So that's how the questions can come with the consensus framework. It will get clash with our individual accounting standard. So we have, first of all, you have to learn the very basic things. So the definitions as well as the recognition criteria. So these are the two items which used to get tested every time, but it's not something like they will ask a direct question where you used to ask, that they will ask you to write the definition of asset or recognition criteria of asset. But these two important facts is needed to be quoted in your answer. So let's say if it's an asset which has been recognized, and if you feel like as per consensus framework it is not an asset, then we have to quote the definition of asset as per consensus framework. Then you should conclude that, okay, as per the definition of asset, the new definition of asset, the recognition of this asset in the individual standard is not in accordance with the consensus framework. So that's how we have to copy paste these definitions and recognition criteria which is there in the consensus framework to your answer. Is it clear? Is it clear, everyone? Can I reply in the chat, guys? How the examiner can frame the questions here. Okay. So it's not an individual question they will ask with consensus framework. Whenever we discuss any particular standard, we have to link it with the consensus framework standard. That's how you have to learn it. Perfect. Perfect. Can you reply in the chat? So in the same way, something very basic in the accounting standard is next one, IFRS 13. So IFRS 13. So IFRS 13 deals with. So what is IFRS 13? It deals with fair value. It's really important. It's almost as same as consensus frameworks. It can literally test anywhere. It can literally test anywhere with any accounting standard, because wherever we use the fair value, like we will use fair value in IAS 36. We are using fair value in IAS 16. We are using the fair value measurement in IAS 14. So it's literally in any of the standards that we do, we have learned in SPR or in FR, literally have to learn this fair value measurement there, right? Without learning this standard, we cannot do the fair value measurement. So let's see, what do you mean by fair value? So what do you mean by fair value? What do you mean by fair value of an asset or a liability? So what do you mean by fair value, guys? So fair value is almost like I always used to say that it's like an exit price. It's like an exit price. It's not the cost of acquiring something, it's like an exit price. Okay. For an asset, then what's the fair value? The exit price. Exit price means the price that we will receive to sell this asset in the market between two market participants, and if you are able to measure it on a particular measurement date, that price that you are able to receive by disposing this asset between two market participants on a particular measurement date in an orderly transaction. It should not be a related party transaction, it should be an orderly transaction. Then the price that we'll receive in such transaction is known as the fair value. Is it clear, everyone? So in the same way for liability, what's the definition of liability? Liability means, again, it's an exit price. How we can exit from the liability? We have to settle it, right? So with respect to liability, what's the definition of fair value? The amount that you have to pay in order to transfer the liability, or the amount that you have to pay in order to settle the liability between two market participants in an orderly transaction on a particular measurement date. That is what known as the definition of liability. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? So whenever we value the fair value of an asset, we have to value it with reference to the, whenever we measure the fair value of an asset, literally we have to measure it in accordance with the principal market. So what do you mean by principal market? What do you mean by principal market? Whenever we have to value the fair value of an asset or liability, we have to value it with respect to the principal market. So what do you mean by principal market? Can you just reply in the chat? What do you mean by principal market? Yeah. So it is market in which the most frequent amount of transaction of this asset or liability happens. The most greatest activity or the most frequent amount of transaction happens. That needs to be considered as the principal market. Okay. Let's say if there is no principal market or active market, if there is no principal or active market, then how will you determine the fair value? How will you determine the fair value? If there is no active market or principal market, then how will you determine the fair value of that asset or a liability? Guys, it's revision, so I expect you guys to reply as well. Or is it the first time you are hearing about IFRS 13? Yeah. So if there is no principal market, then we have to choose the most advantageous market. So what do you mean by the most advantageous market? The market in which we can get the highest price. Let's say there is three markets, A, B, C, and out of these three markets, in which market you are going to get the highest and best price for this asset? That will be considered as the most advantageous market. Is it clear, everyone? So if there is no active market, then only we have to consider the advantageous market. Perfect. So we have different inputs. So we have to consider different factors when we are considering the fair value. So first one, it is level 1 input. So what do you mean by level 1 input? The level 1 input, we will consider the fair value as the fair value of an identical item. So let's say if I'm a listed company, okay, and if I need to measure the fair value of my share. So since I'm a listed company, I will look for another company who is in the same industry, and I will check the fair value of that company. Since both of us are working in the same industry and both are listed, then it's a kind of identical item. So it's an identical factor. So it's a kind of identical observable input. I have got an observable input which is literally identical. So in that scenario, I will consider the fair value of, I can simply say that the fair value of listed company share. It's the best example for level 1 input. And what about level 2 input? What about level 2 input? Let's say if the identical item is not there. Okay, you know that I have a building which is not in the city, it's a village area. I have a 2-floor building which is in a village area. Can I compare it to the market value of a building which is having 2 floors in Ernakulam city or in Bangalore? Can I refer the fair value of a flat which is in any of the main cities, let's say Bangalore or Kochi? So can you just compare the fair value of that flat which is there in Kochi with the 2-floor apartment I have in my own village? No. Why? So level 2, that will be level 2, that is similar items. So this building is a similar item because both of them having the same size and it is made up of the same equipments. But because of that condition or the location is literally different, we have to make some adjustment to that fair value to arrive at the fair value of the building which I have in my village, isn't it? So that is known as level 2. So if level 2 and level 1 is not there, then I will use level 3. Let's say I'm using the replacement cost. What do you mean by replacement cost? That asset value, or let's say I'm using the, I hope you have heard about this term called value in use. Have you heard about value in use? Have you heard about this term called value in use? Yes. So value in use is like an in-house model where we'll predict the value of an asset using the present value of its future cash inflows and outflows generated by the asset, isn't it? So that's a level 3 approach because we are not considering any market related factors. Since the market related factors are not available, we are using our own in-house model to value a particular asset for a company's building or something like that. Okay. So in SBI, you might get a question where the company may use level 2 inputs, but actually level 1 was available, but they have ignored that factor that the level 1 inputs were available. So we have to say that since the level 1 inputs were available, we have to use that fair value which is there in the market, which is more reliable than our own assumptions. So we have to use it. Or in other case, the company may use some in-house model, but the market value was available. Again, in that point of time, you have to say that since the market related inputs were available, the observable inputs were available, then we have to consider those factors before moving into level 3. Is it clear? Okay. So in short, we can say that we have so first of all, we should consider the factors. So what are the factors? As we discussed, the factors will be condition, how we use it, is any restriction on Is there any restriction on its use and the location? So these are the three factors we need to consider. And we have approaches. What are the three different approaches? We have market related approach, then cost related approach, or income related approach. Okay. Okay. So whichever the approach we'll use will always should be based on the observable data. So basically, literally with the help of this observable data, we have these three levels. That is level 1, 2, and so this level 1, 2, and 3 are based on this observable data. Observable data means something which you can literally relate or I can see with my eyes. So that will give more reliability to my state, like that will give more reliability to the data which I am going to disclose in the financial statements. So always you should measure this fair value with respect to the observable data. Is it clear, everyone? So whenever we determine the fair value, we have to consider the factors. There is the conditions, any restriction on use, the locations. Then we have three different approaches: market approach, cost approach, and income approach. Then on the base of the data, we can classify into three different types. That is level 1, level 2, and level 3. Is it clear? Can you reply in the chat? So always the level 3 is unobservable. So literally you have to use your own predictions or your own estimations when it comes to level 3. So there the management's judgment will be under concern because that will lead to ethical issues and all these factors. So even this IFRS 13 can highly get tested in your ethics related questions as well. Are you getting it? And finally, we have to consider fair value of non-financial asset. So if it's a fair value of non-financial asset, let's say you have a land. So how will you determine its fair value on the basis of its highest and so how will you determine the fair value of a non-financial asset? It's to be based on the land that is highest and best. Okay. So we have a question in SPR which is Mehran, which is discussing about this land. So here in this particular question, I will make the discussion. So instead of doing the questions directly, sometimes I will just refer some of the questions in the past papers to discuss our accounting standards. So in this particular question, there is a land. The company is having two choices. Either they can use it for agricultural purpose or they can use it for residential purpose. So always we assume that the highest and best use will be the existing, whatever the existing use of that particular non-financial asset, that will be considered as its highest and best use. But if there is an alternative purpose which is available and it is legally permissible and physically it is accessible and it is financially feasible, if these three factors are met, if these three criteria are met, then you have to consider that highest and best use, alternative use. We have to consider that highest and best use situation to determine the land, to determine the fair value of that non-financial asset. So whenever it's a non-financial asset, we should consider its highest and best use. So in this particular question, there is a land which can be used as agricultural purpose and residential purpose. So since it is using for agriculture purpose, right now it is giving something worth 18 million. But if the company do have an option to convert it into residential purpose, but right now the government is being so come up with some laws because that will literally restrict us from converting this agricultural land to residential purpose. So in that situation, which value will be considered? So if we convert into residential purpose, let's say for the conversion, it may take another 3 million, and the fair value for the residential purpose will be the selling price. The fair value, the market value for a land which is converted into residential purpose will be 23 million. Let's say 23 million. So which one we should consider here? Will you consider this 23 million or will you consider 18 million? Which one will be considered as a fair value of the land? Which one will be considered as the fair value of the land here? Can you reply in the chat? Can you reply in the chat, guys? So 23 million. But I've told that it should be financially accessible. So it is legally permissible. It should be legally permissible. It should be financially accessible, financially feasible, and physically accessible. So here I've told that the government have put restrictions on converting the agricultural land to residential purpose, for residential purpose. So is it legally permissible there? Is it legally permissible? Is it legally permissible in this situation to do it? Because the government have put restriction. No. So since it is not legal, since it is legally not permissible to do it, in that situation, we have to consider it as a, you have to consider that current use as its highest and best use. That is agricultural purpose. Suppose if there was no such restrictions, then we would have considered that 23 million, but it's not the whole 23 million. I have told that it will incur another 3 million for converting this agricultural land to a residential purpose. In that scenario, so it should be the net figure, that is 23 million minus the transaction cost of converting it. So literally the 20 million will be considered as the fair value of the land. Is it clear? So we should always consider these three factors, which is physically accessible, financially feasible, and legally permissible. Okay, so even if it's a very small standard, still there are multiple situations in which it has been tested. This IFRS 13 has been tested, but they won't test it individually, they will test it with any other standards. Is it clear? So let's say we have estimated the residual value of an asset. So a professional have told that the residual value is something around 10 million, but we are assuming that the residual value is 15 million. So on the base of our own estimates, because the accountant is having an opinion that the value of this particular asset is really volatile, so it keeps on changing in the market. If we listen to that individual professional valuer, it can distort the performance of the company, or it can literally distort your financial statements. So in that scenario, which one will you consider here? Which amount will you have to consider here? Will you listen to the professional, or will you have to follow the judgments of your manager? Will you listen to the professional, or we have to follow the guidelines of your management as an accountant? It is physically accessible, financially feasible, legally permissible. These are the three conditions. Is it clear, guys? So that's it for the first basic standard. So even though these are two basic accounting standards, it can test multiple times. It has been tested multiple times. It's a really important standard, in particular, especially IFRS 30. I hope it's clear. If you have any other doubts, you can just ask. If you have got any other doubts with respect to the two standards, especially IFRS 13, you can ask. If there was another use which also meet the criteria, so that's what we will consider that use. But which one literally gives you the highest and best use, will highest and best value, will consider it. So sometimes the scenario can be more trickier in such a way that, let's say, I haven't received the permission to convert this land to the for residential purpose, but my neighbors have already received. So there is a possible chance that even I will receive. So I can consider it as a situation where it is legally permissible. So sometimes they will give some hints indirectly to conclude the fact that it is legally permissible. So these are very tricky areas. You have to read the questions very carefully. Sometimes they won't say that the permission has been given directly to us, but the permission is already given to my neighbor. So what does it literally indicate? Okay, even I will get, there's a possibility that even I will get the permission in future from the government. So I will consider it as a legally permissible situation, and I will just account for the fair value in accordance to the highest and best use. Is it clear, everyone? Fine. Next one we are going to discuss. That's a very important standard with respect to SPR. So I'm not just going in that order. I am mainly focusing on the main important standards of SPR. Okay. And whatever which is left to cover in the accounting standards, I will give the recording specifically to that. Okay. So in SPR, IFRS 15, or even in F7 IFRS 15, we know that we have to follow a 5-step model approach. So with respect to SPR, especially in SPR, we need to understand, or we need to remember each and every provisions which is there in your relevant steps. Okay. So in step number 1, it is to identify the contract. Okay. So this revenue means the revenue from own operation. So this is your revenue from own operation. Doesn't mean that the revenue that you get from the sale of an asset or a disposal of an asset or a non-current asset or a building or an associate or a subsidiary. This IFRS 15 revenue takes into account of the revenue from our own operation. Okay. So first one is identify the contract. So when you identify a contract, again we need to consider certain factors. How will you identify this contract? You have to check the fact that whether both parties have approved it. Like what are the rights and obligation, whatever the rights and obligation, whether it is approved by both parties. Rights and obligations of this contract must be approved by both parties. Okay. Okay. The payment terms can be identified, whether it is in credit, whether it is in EMI, so it should be identified. Then, so the commercial substance, the contract should have a commercial substance. And finally, it is probable that entity will be entity will receive consideration. Is it clear? So in order to identify a contract, this criteria needs to be met. We can't just say that okay, if there is a contract, we can recognize the revenue. So step number one is identify a contract. Is it clear, everyone? So the example. What do you mean by commercial substance? The transaction should have a profit element. If I'm giving something for free, I cannot consider it as a commercial substance. Or if I'm selling some goods at its original cost, I'm not charging any profit, then we can't say that the contract have a commercial, that particular transaction have a commercial substance. So if I'm selling my lectures to you, I will be charging a profit apart from the cost. If I'm giving a recording lecture, I will be charging a cost there, right? I'm not just recovering my cost, I will charge a profit on about. So then we can say that it's a commercial substance. But if I'm giving my lectures for free, can you say that it's a transaction is commercial? It's a commercial substance? No. Or if I'm just getting my cost recovered from that particular amount, that will not be considered as a situation where there is a commercial. Is it clear, everyone? And it should be probable that the entity will be paid. That is, in future, if suppose there is a higher chance that the customer will get liquidated. So in that situation, we will not consider it as a. So we are not going to focus on that matter again, because the probability that entity will receive consideration, there is only a probability that entity will receive consideration, isn't it? So in the question, if it is said that your customer is facing some financial difficulty, in that situation, can you recognize the revenue here? No. So always you have to consider this point. So even this point is written in a, which is more explained more in SPR in the textbooks, but at least you should be able to remember these keywords, because this keyword should be in your answers. Okay. Step number 2. Next one it is identification of separate performance attribution. Okay. So there are two conditions will come under the separate performance attribution. So I hope that you remember about the principal agent relationship. So what is the principal agent relationship? So if you are acting as an agent, can you recognize the whole revenue of that contract? If you're acting as an agent, can you recognize the whole revenue of that contract? No. Only as an agent, we can recognize or is it clear? And with respect to warranty, there is two situations. Warranty required by law and warranty option. So what do you mean by warranty in option? Let's say if you are purchasing any of your any products from e-commerce or something like that, such as Flipkart. Okay. So in that scenario, if you want, you can claim, we can add an additional warranty package to your product. But in that scenario, it's an option. Warranty is an option. It is not required by law. We have to take the warranty, and even for the seller, it is not required that they have to give this warranty to us. So if it's a warranty in option, that will be accounted as a separate. Right. We have to accord it as a from the perspective of the seller need to accord it as a separate performance obligation, or it's a separate product actually we charge from the customer. If it is warranty in option, if it is warranty by law, then the seller needs to account it as a part of the original price, and literally we have to account it as a provision. We have to create a provision there. So is it clear, guys? So always the step number 2 is to identify the separate performance obligation. So how will you say it as a separate performance obligation? It will happen with these scenarios. And apart from that, whenever you get a question where they are asking you to identify the separate performance obligation, you should focus on the fact that whether it is separately identifiable, or does it have an individual market value? Can I sell this item individually in the market? Can I sell this item independently in the market? Are they able to generate cash flow independently? This is how we'll determine the fact that whether it is separately identified. Is it clear? Let's say you are making a hospital and you have to do different works related to it. Your contract, you have entered into a contract to make hospital, and the hospital says that you have to make the building, and in the contract you have just written that you have to make the building, the electricity work, the plumbing, and all this stuff. So you have given, so it's like a situation where you literally give the key to the owners once the hospital is finished. So how many performance obligations are there in this particular contract? How many performance obligations are there in this particular contract? You have entered into a contract to make a hospital building. So that's a contract. So in this situation, how many performance obligations are there? And we have identified that these are our duties. We need to prepare the building, and we need to prepare the overall, we have to complete the painting purpose, the electricity, the hospital equipments, everything, it's our duty. So in that scenario, how many performance obligations are there? Is it a single, or if there is multiple performance obligation? Is it a single performance obligation or a multiple? Single. Why it is single, right, sir? Why it is a single performance obligation? Can you guys just reply in the voice? Then it will be more interactive. Can you just turn on your audio and just reply me in chat or in chat? Why is a single performance obligation, Rachel? And why it's a multiple situation, Angelina? How we have arrived at that conclusion? Because that's what the examiner is asking for. It's not a F7 question where you just need to end your answer within a single word that, okay, there is a single performance obligation or there's a multiple performance obligation. Literally, you have to explain it as well. So how will you explain it? Or how will you give a justification for your answer? There is a hospital, the contract you have entered into, that is to make a hospital. With regards to the construction of that hospital, these are the main factors we need to consider: the electricity, then the maintenance, the hospital equipment, fitting the hospital equipments, then the painting and the overall construction of the building itself. So how many performance obligations are there? Is it a single performance obligation, or there's a multiple performance obligation? Can you reply in the chat, guys? Multiple. Okay. So yes, these are identifiable item in the individual perspective, but here, since you are entered into a contract to construct the hospital, so everything is included in it. Everything you have not entered into a construction to make the building. You have entered into a contract to construct the entire hospital. So everything that you do with respect to it will come as a part of this single contract. Is it clear, everyone? So there is only a single contract. That's what I have told, that if you read the definitions, it may looks more easier, but sometimes they will give different situations. They have to use the appropriate knowledge and judge. You have to give your judgment. That's what actually needed in SPR. It's not that it's not about how much knowledge you have. It's about how you can how properly you can judge a particular situation after learning a particular standard. That is not written in textbook. You have to practice more questions, as well as, yeah, it's actually it's a skill actually. The professional judgment you have to give there. Is it clear? And now when we are moving to step number 3, what is step number 3? Determination of transaction price. So when we determine the transaction price, it will include, we have to consider the variable consideration, as well as if there is a financing component, we have to consider it. And sometimes the amounts consideration payable to the customer, we have to consider it. So all these factors needs to be considered when we determine the transaction price. So what do you mean by variable consideration? Variable consideration means that, let's say, you have a fixed contribution, and apart from that, they say that if the company is able to make sales which is more than $1,000 or something like that, then we will charge an additional price of this amount. Or let's say you have sold a particular product and you have told the company that if their sales revenue is becoming more than 1 million on the base of the patent that you sell, if the sales proceeds increases by 1 million every year, then you will get 10% of this 1 million. In that scenario, this is known as a variable consideration. So if it's a variable consideration, is it appropriate to recognize it as a revenue? Yes, it is appropriate on the basis of the certainty, how probable, or we have to consider the certainty, we have to consider the probability that how much certain it is we will be able to receive the amount. If it is highly certain that you are going to get that extra revenue, then we can consider it as a variable consideration and it will be included as a part of your revenue. Otherwise, we should not. The same way, if there is a financing component, if there is a huge gap between the date of the transfer of this goods or service and the date when you are about to receive the cash from your customer, then there is a financing component. So we have to consider the time value of money concept. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? Yes. Then sometimes we have to consider the consideration payable to customer. What do you mean by this consideration payable to customer? Let's say when you're constructing a building, and you have told that if you are not able to complete this building beyond that particular date, you have given a date, maybe after 6 months. If you're not able to complete it after 6 months, then you will give a penalty. You have to pay a penalty to your customer. So in that scenario, if there is highly probable that you will not be able to complete your project on time, then you have to pay the penalty there, right? Isn't it? Can I reply in the chat? Yes. So in that situation, can you recognize the whole amount or the whole transaction price as your revenue? No. So if there is probable that you have to pay this penalty, so it's a consideration which is payable to the customer, okay, as a result of not able to meet the criteria. In that particular situation, we have to recognize the revenue from the transaction price. We'll deduct this particular penalty amount. From the transaction price, we'll deduct the amount of penalty. Then whatever which is remaining, that will get transferred to the revenue account. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? Okay. And next one is step number 4. So what is step number 4? Allocation of revenue to individual performance obligation. The allocation of revenue to the individual performance obligation. So how will you account for it? Whatever the transaction price, so allocate the transaction price to individual performance obligation. So whatever the transaction price which you have calculated in step number 3, it needs to be allocated to different products and services on the basis of individual standalone price. So what do you mean by individual standalone price? What do you mean by individual standalone price? The list price of that product or service. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. So let's say you have purchased a mobile and network service 2 years at $200. Okay. The list price of the phone is $60 and this price of the service is $80 per annum. This is the individual price, but you are given it as a combo where the mobile is completely free and you're saying that the network service is getting charged for 200, that is as a whole, that is $100 in year 1 and $100 in year 2. So how will you allocate the revenue here? How will you recognize the revenue here? Will you recognize the revenue as 100 in first year and 100 in second year, or do you have to take any other approaches? Yeah, we'll allocate it on the pro rata basis. How will you allocate it on the pro rata basis? So that 200 will get allocated to 4, that is 60 divided by 60 plus 80 into 2, right? That's the total transaction price, right? 2 years. So how much it is? What will be the allocation? What will be the allocation to our mobile? Can you reply in the chat? 200 multiplied by 60 divided by 60 plus 80 into 2 years. Can you reply in the chat, guys? Yes, 54.5. Are you getting it? 200 into 60 divided by 60 plus 80 into 2 is 54.5. So that's the revenue we can recognize with respect to the mobile or the phone. So when will you recognize it? We have to recognize it in year one itself. We have to recognize it in year one itself. This 54.5. Phone 54.5. And what about the service, the 2-year service? How much is the revenue you're going to recognize in year one? So out of 200, we know that 54.5 is for phone. And what about the remaining amount? What about the remaining amount? 200 minus 54.5. 200 minus 54.5. 144.5. 145.5. It will get splitted for 2 years, right? It will get splitted for 2 years, and literally what will be your revenue? What would be your revenue here? Yeah, 72.5. So in year one, therefore in year one itself, the revenue for network service, you will recognize the revenue for network service, which is how much? 72.75. 72. So what's the total revenue we can recognize in year one? The total revenue in year one, it is 72.5 plus 54.5. So how much is the amount of revenue we can recognize in year one? $127.5. 127. And what about in year two? Year two, do we need to recognize the revenue for phone? No. With respect to service, you will recognize the revenue of 72.75. So if you are not following this approach, IFRS 15 approach, step number 4, what would have happened? You would have recognized a revenue of 100 in year one and recognized a revenue of 100 in year two. So literally it would have understated your revenue in year one and overstated your revenue in year two. Is it clear, everyone? Fine. And finally, the last step is step number 5. It is with respect to revenue recognition. It is with respect to revenue recognition. Revenue recognition. Either at point of time, or over a period of time. If it is at point of time, how will you recognize it? If it is at the point of time, how will you recognize the revenue? If you feel like the control of that particular asset has been transferred on that point of time, then we will recognize the revenue there itself. But if you felt like the performance obligation is satisfied over a period of time, okay, so in that scenario, the revenue should be recognized on that particular manner. Is it clear, everyone? So let's say you have constructed a building. So you initially received an advance, and the control of the overall building will be transferred to the customer on the date of completion of this project. And he will be entitled to receive the remaining amount even at the end of its project, So how will you account for this particular transaction? Will you account for the revenue at point of time or over a period of time? Will you account for this revenue over a period of time or at the point of time? over a period. Why it's over a period? Why it's over a period? Because it's a construction. The buildings takes time to complete, but we have to check the control. So when you have transferred the control, when we are transferring the control is getting transferred at the completion of the project. And you are not entitled to receive any payment in between. You will be receiving the remaining amount at the date of completion. So what does it indicate? We have to recognize revenue at the point of time rather than over a period of time. So the scenario can be twisting. It's not something like as you have seen in F7, if you have seen a construction, immediately you will write it as a over the period of time recognition. You have to read the scenario, we have to analyze the scenario in depth. But let's say if you are issuing invoices after every year on year, we are issuing the invoices, and that literally means that you can recognize the revenue over a period of time, because you can after every year or after each and every stage of that project, you are sending the invoice and you are entitled to receive it as well. Okay, they may pay it or not, but they are entitled to receive it. So in that scenario, we can recognize the revenue over a period of time. But whenever it is written that, okay, you're only entitled to receive this amount at the end of its completion of a project, then it's a situation where the control will get transferred at the point of time rather than over a period of time. Is it clear, everyone? Yeah, it will be mentioned. It will be mentioned. If you are sending the invoice on a year-on-year basis, so obviously you are entitled, right? Perfect. So this is a 5-step model. So it's literally important to understand the 5 step. Okay. So apart from that, another factors which you have to take away from IFRS 15 is with regards to the construction cost. What all includes in the contract cost? The contract cost should only include those costs which are directly attributable with respect to the construction. Okay. As well as with respect to our, let's say, with respect to the contract, if you incurred any such costs such as wastage, or if you are incurring any kind of administrative cost, can you include it as a part of your contract cost? The wastage or wastage of material, or if there is any administrative expenses, can you include it as a part of your cost? No, it will get expensed off. So the contract cost will only include those costs which are directly incurred in relation to the construction of that contract. Is it clear? So any kind of wastage or any kind of overhead expense or administrative expense that you incur with respect to this construction will be expensed off to P&L. Okay, because it is not directly traceable, or we can say that it cannot be recovered. It is not recovered through its future revenue. These are costs which cannot be recovered in future. That's the reason we are expensing it off. Is it clear? And sometimes there can be modifications to contract. Okay, let's say you are building a, you are making a building or something like that, and you plan to increase, the customer wants you to increase the floor size. Then what was written in the contract? In the square feet, they have simply increased the square feet because they have to extend. They have liked your work and they are asking you to extend it. So in that scenario, can you consider it as a contract modification? Can you consider it as a contract modification or not? You're doing the flooring or the tiling of an office, and you are asked to do an extension to it. So in this situation, how will you account for it? Can you consider it as a contract modification? I will just give an example. So it's written, it's in your textbook itself. It's written in the textbook itself. So it's really important to read the Kaplan textbook. Okay. But now it's a very late time, so I will just give you the main points that you have to go through. So can you just read the scenario? Just go through the scenario. So have you read that situation? So here our objective is to construct a commercial building. So even if there is any modifications, since it's a part of the original contract, we cannot consider it as a separate. We don't need to consider it as a separate contract. Why? Because always the remaining goods or service to be provided should be distinct. Then I can consider it as a separate contract. Is it clear? So otherwise, if it is distinct, then I'll consider it as two separate contract. I have to consider the extra service that you provide or the extra goods that you provide should be considered as a new contract. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, guys, so that's it for the day. So we have considered some of the basic accounting standards, and even we have gone through IFRS 15 as well. So these are some of, I'm just going through the main accounting standards, okay, and which has been tested multiple times in your papers. So conceptual framework and fair value, for sure it will get tested. Somewhere in between it will get tested. And IFRS 15 is another standard which has been tested very frequently. Okay, so we'll be covering these main standards first, then we'll move on to the consultation part and the current issues and other interpretation part. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, guys, so that's it for